I came up with this design for the concrete outer part of the box. My first thought designing it was to avoid any sharp corners, but then I decided, since this was mostly just a test anyway, it would be good to see how well sharp corners would work out. I needed an inner and outer form to go around this shape. The inner form is a solid block with just curved sides and a piece cut out from the top. I was able to take this waste piece and reshape it to fill in that area on the top of the outer form. The inner form is attached to a piece of melamine from underneath, but to avoid having to keep flipping it over and locating the screw holes, I attached the parts of the outer form with pocket holes. I used some spacer blocks to center it around the inner form. When I made the concrete chain, the surface quality of the first link was much worse than the others. The only difference was that the first time there hadn't been wet concrete sitting in the form for a day. So I figured that the dry form pulled the water out of the concrete too quickly. Otherwise, that had turned out well, so I used the same approach of coating the form with water-based poly, followed by wax. But this time I filled the form with water and let it soak for a few hours first. It leaked a little, but I just topped it off from time to time. I wanted to try using a fiber reinforcement in the concrete. There are several different types of fibers. Most of them require a face coat of concrete without the fibers, because otherwise you end up seeing the fibers in the surface. These PVA fibers are supposed to be fine enough that they are invisible. The downside is they don't provide nearly as much strength, so it's important not to park your truck on your concrete bandsaw box. I think that holds for most bandsaw boxes though. The amount of fibers that you add is a percentage of the total weight of the concrete, including water. So you need to know how much concrete you're going to need at the start and how much that is going to weigh. Since I knew how much water it took to fill the form, I used that volume and the average density of concrete to come up with 7.5 pounds, which I rounded up to 8 to be on the safe side. Of that 8 pounds, 1 ounce would be the fibers. It ended up only taking about 6.5 pounds to fill the form. I'm not sure why that was so far off. The problem I had was that the fibers coagulated into these little rock-hard clumps, and there was no way the mixer I was using was going to break them up. So I ended up trying to break them up with my fingers as best as I could, which was not fun at all. There's got to be a better way to mix it, but I don't know what it is. My expectations of getting a good result were really low, considering that there was no way I broke up all of the clumps. But there was nothing to do but press on and see what happens. I worked the concrete in and vibrated it with a quarter sheet sander as I went along, trying to get out all the air bubbles. The one really foolish thing I did was I never made the inner part of the form the same height as the outer part, so I couldn't level it off properly at the end. It was about 4 days until I took it out of the form, and since I had to wait that long, I'm going to make you watch every screw come out. But at least it's at 10 times speed. Overall, I was happy with how it turned out. I don't see any clumps of fibers exposed on the outside, so that ended up not being a problem. After letting it dry out for a couple more days, I wiped off with mineral spirits as much of the excess wax as I could, and gave it a sanding which evened out the color. I didn't have a masonry grinding wheel to flatten the back, so I used a mostly already worn out sanding belt. You can sand concrete, but it wears out the paper really quickly. I was wondering how strong the concrete was, since I had over a pound left over. I spread that out inside of a plastic bag into a sheet about the same thickness as the box sides. It took somewhere in between a tap and a whack to break it. I made the drawer as a normal Bandsaw Box kind of drawer, cutting a block to fit into the opening and then sawing off the front and back so I could scoop out the inside of the drawer on the bandsaw. I wanted to have a recessed pull, and I thought it should echo the outer shape of the box. I used the CNC with a couple of fluting tool paths to make the recess curved at the ends, and that curve is in line with where the curve happens on the top of the box. Then I used a chisel to undercut the handle part. The biggest thing to making a bandsaw box look good is to have the drawer centered in the opening. I added these thin wood shims that center it vertically and also make it so the drawer isn't sliding on the concrete. I added a block in the back which acts as a stop, and there's a rabbet at the back of the drawer which lets it slide in over the top and allows for fine-tuning the depth of the drawer. I clamped on some strips of scrap to act as a guide to place the feet in the right place while I epoxied them in place. The walnut got a couple coats of armor seal, but I'm going to leave the concrete just the way it is. I don't want to put anything on it that would darken it. I like the contrast, and I like that it just looks like concrete. I don't want it to look like something else.